Hello everybody, once again Jose Rodriguez here. We're going to talk about and help you guys that are on the Epson side. Yeah, imagine that. Yes, I also like Epson printers, don't get me wrong. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Epson printers right now. No, 6 with the new XP 15000, and I think I have another R340, so make that 7 Epson printers. So let's stick, however, with the larger format 17-inch capacity printers. That brings into play the 3800, which is one of the classics out there. If you still have one that is working properly, you have a gem of a printer there. As long as it keeps on working, you can replace the wasting cartridges. It's no problem at all. In fact, there are ways to reset those and repack them. So that's something that will eliminate the situation of a printer basically stopping dead in its tracks, and you can't continue printing until you replace those, say, internal ink pads or reset something. Well, that's not the case with the 3800. You have a user replaceable cartridge. The same with the 3880, and of course the P800, and hopefully, I don't know whether this is ever going to happen, but the P900 as well. And if that happens, then more than likely the P700 also will be able to be used with a third-party type products, although I am not going to hold my breath on that one, folks. These are currently supported 100%. You can buy refillable cart systems, and again, resetters to reset your wasting cartridges. There's a trick to do that, but nevertheless, you can still repack them and reuse them. That way you don't end up tossing these things in the trash and end it up at a landfill somewhere. They will never deteriorate. Believe me, they will last for a millennia. So our only choice is a refillable cartridge system. And I'm going to sort of include the P800, even though Epson kind of locked it out of the ability to use third-party products. Okay, they did something. Basically, they do not let you reset a chip because it will be recognized as the same chip. Whereas the 3800 and the 3880 doesn't care if it sees the same chip code, basically. So we have here a refillable cartridge. I forget where I got these from. I think it was one of the earlier companies that was available. So this is very old right now. Here's an OEM cartridge, which if you really know what you're doing, and I have a series of videos to show you how to do that, you can modify the exit port to allow you to inject ink directly into the internal ink bag and be able to then reset the chip and use it. If you don't do that carefully, you will end up with a printer that's going to hemorrhage ink everywhere. So it's something that if you're really brave, I recommend you do. But if you're not, I do not recommend it at all. Okay. It is simply best to just use a good refillable cartridge set. You will need your original chip from your, say in this case, this is a light magenta. So if this happens to be a light magenta cartridge, you remove the controller chip and you mount the original OEM chip, matching color that is, inside the compartment, and pop the chip back on. There are some little spring-loaded contacts that mate with that chip, and all it needs is to be able to extract the color ID code. And every chip has a different color ID code. So all yellow chips, thousands and thousands of them, they all have specific yellow ID codes. They're not the same. They are all different. So you need to have one of those chips. And all it wants to see is that, hey, I'm looking at yellow, and the controller chip says I am full. Okay? When the controller chip says you are empty, you remove the cartridge. That will disrupt power to the chip, and it will reset the levels. All the chip is doing, the controller chip, that is controlling ink levels and communicating with the original OEM chip that lies underneath. Okay? So simple, right? Same thing with a P800. As long as you have a device such as the one that I am using, a decoder board, well, that works just fine, but it's $400, and I don't even think they're available anymore. So once a cartridge is declared empty, You reset the whole lot at once by pressing a button on the board that lies behind the printer, okay? And that will bring all of your levels back up to full. And here's what we're gonna discuss. This is the reason for this video. P800 with either a board or chipless firmware installed, and that acts a little bit different. That rather than give you ink levels that gradually drop and such, no, it always reads full. It would be like your car, your automobile, telling you you have a constant supply of fuel, and you happily drive up and down the road and you have no clue as to why you ran out of fuel, okay, halfway through your trip, because my gauge indicated that I had a full tank. In reality, you did not. Your petrol or fuel levels dropped and you had no clue. The same thing with the P800 with chipless firmware. Always indicates that's full. So you have to physically check those cartridges. And that's the only one. That's the only one at this point. The 3880, 3800 with this kind of cartridge, controller chip and original chip underneath, you will get ink levels. You get ink levels indicated as you print. Here is the catch that you have to absolutely stick with or stick to. Always check your ink levels. Well, why? I'm getting ink level indicators. Yeah, but here's the catch, and this is something they don't tell you about. So this original cartridge, the same for the P800, I cannot speak for the P900. That's a different size and volume cartridge. Different shape also as well. So this cartridge comes from the factory loaded with 90 milliliters of ink. But everywhere else it says 80. Well, they give you an ink buffer. And the reason being, this has an ink bag inside. And as you use ink, as you're printing, the ink bag begins to collapse. You can never, ever reach a point where your bag would be fully collapsed before the chip decides to tell you, or the printer, or the driver, that it is supposedly empty. You cannot ever reach that point. It has to tell you it's empty, but you still have ink. That bag has not collapsed yet. That's basically for safety measures. You would actually ruin something if the printer continued to try to print with a collapsed bag. Why? This is pressurized. Positive pressure is what keeps that ink flowing into your system. Without positive pressure, ink cannot flow through. So once it reaches, if it ever reaches empty, collapsed, that's it. Something bad will happen. I cannot tell you what, but something bad I think would happen. The reason, that's why they incorporate 10 extra ml of ink. That way the bag will never be collapsed whenever the chip says, hey, I'm empty, please replace me. Now, on a side note, be aware that if you're using OEM only, you're literally throwing away about 10 ml of ink every time you remove a cartridge that was declared empty. Keep that in mind. That's how I am able to extract a lot of OEM ink and use it for my smaller refillable cartridges for something like the 2880 and the earlier 2400. Yeah, I can get away with it. R3000, I can actually use ink from the 3880s and install it on my refillable cartridges. But that's another subject. All right, so let's talk about the refillable cartridges now. And here is the big catch. So they look the same, don't they? They're absolutely the same size. So you would think that they hold the same volume of ink. Well, they do not. Okay, they do not. Inside, there's nothing restricting that very thin Mylar bag from holding 90 milliliters of ink, even though you're going to use 80 approximately. Right here internally, because these are going to be pressurized, remember. So they have strengthened the structure of the cartridge by installing a bunch of internal baffles, including a priming chamber. You can see them there, all of those internal. Basically, it's like if you were looking at a cross-section of a building. You have internal walls adding support to your ceiling. So that takes up space, folks. Okay, that takes away some of that real estate you need to be able to load a volume of ink that will be in comparison or in calibration with that original chip. That chip is telling the controller chip that, hey, this is supposed to be a T58 cartridge and you're supposed to be calibrated at, 80 ml of ink. It is calibrated for 80, but the cartridge cannot hold more than like 70 before it will overflow. So whether you fill it to the brim where it's actually overflowing almost out of the cartridge body, and then you prime it and then you top it off again, you're only getting about maybe 90% of the actual volume that it requires, so that you get a good match between chip reporting and actual ink usage. Okay, so what are the dangers of this? Well, one of them is quite catastrophic, if you ask me. Here's the scenario that you will run into. You fill these up, you put them in your printer, and you're happily printing. Every once in a while, you have to run a clean cycle because you haven't printed enough, whatever the reason. You're going to be using your ink. The chip happily reports what it believes you used up. Levels start to drop in chunks. It's not a gradual linear drop, it's in chunks. So yesterday might have been here. It runs a little purge before you print, and boom, it drops another chunk. Okay, so when it reaches empty, you ran out of ink a long time ago. Okay, you may have run out of ink, and you may not have noticed because there was still ink in the ink system or the ink line, and the printhead has dampers as well that have ink in them. But at some point, guess what you've been aspirating into your ink lines, unbeknownst to you? Because the printhead still had ink in it, you have aspirated air. How? There was nothing but air in here, and there's no ink back here. So this does not collapse. This just keeps feeding you air if you physically run out of ink because of that mismatch in reporting. The chip expects to have you load 80 ml, but you really only loaded 70. And so at some point, if you continue printing without doing this, and that is periodically topping off your cartridges. So a habit that you must get into is to every couple of months, say you print often, so every couple of months, open up the ink compartment and remove the cartridges and look at them. See where the ink levels are. If they are like halfway down, top everything off at that point. Now I have made a modification to these cartridges, and I will show you. So normally what happens is you remove the cartridge, you hold it in this orientation, remove this plug, top it off. You will see the ink rise to the very top. Sorry, to the very top, put the plug back in. That's it. You're done. Pop it back into the printer. The chip will still report at whatever level it was at before. Okay? Remember, you were not empty, so you cannot expect to have a reset take place. That only happens when you're empty. So this is what I did. I drilled a hole very carefully right here on the corner. Notice this has got like an angular facet. This allows me to remove this plug and refill it while it is still installed in the printer. Okay? Now, why? Why bother? Because then I don't have to remove the cartridges over and over and over, except when it's time to reset the chip. Look at this port and compare it to the OEM port. This is a tank. This is, I don't know what kind of car I should compare it to. A Pinto. This will wear out 10 times sooner than this will wear out. Okay? So the less times that I remove those cartridges, the better. So what you can do, since you have a transparent cartridges, these are all transparent or semi-translucent, you should be able to see that they need ink. And then with a bottle and needle, carefully remove this while it was still attached to the printer. In other words, install, insert the ink that you need. If it starts to overflow, you will see, because this sticks out a little bit. You will see the ink rising to the top. All you gotta do, all you need to do, it doesn't have to be filled to the very brim. All you need to maintain is ink in the cartridge at all times, because otherwise you will empty your priming chamber located right here. See that little section? It looks like a whistle, right? Circle, square. And you prime that through this port right here. You remove that plug, insert a syringe, and suck back. That's what you do initially. Now let me tell you the nightmare that you will encounter if you forget to do this. The recommendations that I have given you. You haven't topped off anything, and all of a sudden one of the cartridges says are empty, and in reality you've been sucking air into your system. Let me tell you, cleaning cycles are not going to do the job. Simply, they are not. You need to do a complete ink recharge. Oh my gosh. Well, you need to buy somewhere the adjustment program for that particular printer and run it. And you better have a complete set of cartridges totally topped off, because it's going to use up a ton of ink. Okay, and it's all going to get dumped straight out of the printer into your waste ink cartridge. That's the only way you're going to push out air, just like you did when you initially set up your printer. You pushed out all that air and replaced it with liquid ink. That's what you have to do, and that's the price you and I would pay if we neglected by not keeping tabs visually with our eyes of our actual ink levels. Okay, that's the most important thing you can do. With the P800 running on the board that I am using, the chip decoder board, I have to do that. I have to periodically open the lid and take a look, physically take a look at my cartridges and top them off as required, so that then physically I have full tanks of gas on all 9 cartridges, and the chips are being reported at various levels. And when one goes empty, I perform the resetting and check my inks again, top it off if I need to. Anytime you are below half, you should top off. You don't have to do it unnecessarily, but anytime you go below half, top everything off so that you have all brand new levels, in other words. Now, with the chipless firmware, different approach, you're always going to have full levels on your ink level indicator on your driver, as well as your P800 screen. It will indicate full. Do not ignore that. Do not just think, okay, somehow magically I am remanufacturing ink. No, you're using up ink. So make sure, double sure this time, to really, really check your system to make sure that you never, ever go below 50%. That's a good safety margin to stick to. All right, I hope that clarifies the procedure that you should follow when you are refilling that family of printers. And we hope someday the P900 and possibly the P700 can be used with third-party products, although they tell you straight up, no, it cannot be used. Well, they said that about previous printers as well. So what they would have to create, of course, is to somehow defeat whatever was implemented, whether it is in the motherboard itself or the firmware, and then rewrite a firmware that would be easily installed and would, again, just render all of the values as being up. Now, what good would that do if it's such a pain in the butt to modify the original cartridges to refill them? It would be extremely easy for them to just simply create refillable cartridges. And they would have a set of universal chips that will be recognized by your printer one time, because they have never been used. Remember, those codes would have never been seen by your printer, so they would be accepted. That's what happened with the refillable cartridges for the P800. All of those chips, tens of thousands of cartridge sets were created, and all had the same chip with the same ID code for color. Each color had its own ID code. Now, it was first recognized and accepted, but then when you try to reset it, sure, it resets, but immediately sees that it's the same chip. You see, and then it just keeps it at red X. So the firmware, CHIPLESS that is, would ignore that because the levels never drop. And technically what is happening is that the printer's memory has recorded that ID code, and initially it recorded it at the level that it initially was. So ID code so-and-so, let's just call it a phone number, and it has a level of full, and it dropped halfway. Well, maybe at halfway point I reset it to full. It cannot accept that. It cannot accept the same ID code that now shows a higher level than it previously was. You see what I mean? The only thing it will accept is that same code, but it wants to see that you are actually using ink. It has to see your levels have to be dropping for it to be acceptable to the printer. So by having constantly up levels, the printer is probably going nuts, scratching its head, going, wait a minute, what the heck is going on? This guy's been printing like a mad dog, and my ink levels are not dropping. There's nothing you could do about it, Mr. Printer. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay? So, to leave you, top off your cartridges pretty much constantly. Okay? Make sure they're always full, because you do not want to deal to having to perform a brand new ink recharge. Not only is it uneconomical, it is wasteful and totally unnecessary. All right, that's it for now. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and like. And as always, happy printing, everybody. Happy refilling. Bye-bye, everyone.